So this is a little bit different. Typically, I like to read stuff in one book and keep it all together, but then again, anything that has to do with the Manson family is always a little bit different, isn't it? So I've already read some of the poetry in this book, Pros and Cons, starting out with Patricia Krenwinkel. Now, this was a very interesting book that I didn't know existed until I had read, actually, Carleen Faith's book about Leslie Van Houten, The Long Prison Journey of Leslie Van Houten. Now, she kind of sort of mentions that Leslie was published, or that she had wrote short stories, of course, while incarcerated, which at the time of Carleen's book, Leslie was still incarcerated. But it had said that Leslie had been published before. And pretty much every book, I guess you could say, that talks about the girls when they go onto death row, almost everyone said that, or each one has shown that they had an interest in writing. Susan wrote it in her book. Obviously, you could see Patricia has written, and of course Leslie has been claimed to appreciate writing too. Now, this is the only piece of work by Leslie Van Houten that I have seen published. While this is the only piece of work I've seen Patricia Krenwinkel published in, this has multiple pieces by Patricia. Now, this book only has one thing from Leslie, and it is a short story called I'm a Fibbon. And it seems to be based loosely, if you might want to say loosely, I don't know how loosely, upon Leslie's, I believe, first experience being put in jail. So what's really interesting, though, about this book, this book has a story behind it, and it's kind of weird, obviously, because it has to do with the Manson family. So this book, Pros and Cons, it's not written but edited, right? It's compiled by Frank Earl Andrews. Now, I will tell you, I don't know 100% if Andrews is still alive. I don't believe he is. If he is, he would be incredibly old. He was born about 1937 or 1938. And now Frank Earl Andrews I'm going to say was because I think he has actually passed away. But Andrews was a con. He was in prison for, armed robbery. I believe he tried or he did shoot a cop. I do have a couple of articles I'll put on the screen for that. Now, he was in prison for that, and then I looked up some news articles because, of course, I was looking up stuff about Leslie. Now, looking stuff up about Leslie, I found, of course, articles about this book, too. And those articles stated that Andrews had been released on parole in 1975. And so he had got out on parole in 1975, and his parole was to last through 1999. Now, from what I could see, I guess what happened was that he was on parole through 99, and I guess from then he was released. And from the records I've looked, it seems like he might have passed away in 2007. But not long after being released, he conjured up a relationship of some sorts with Leslie Van Houten. Now, I'll go a little bit into it because I also wrote about this for my review for Carleen Faith's book, so I don't want to repeat myself over and over. But basically, Frank Earl Andrews got into contact with Leslie Van Houten because I guess they had mutual friends, and somebody had told him to get into touch with her, and they started writing letters, and he claims in articles that he really loved her writing, and so that's why he wanted to publish her in a book. And of course they fell in love, and he would visit her when she was in prison. And back then in the 70s, prison was very, very different from what you see today, from what you see on TV. Granted, not saying TV is the best source, but in actual, in documentaries and stuff, if you see a prison documentary today, it is very different from the life prisoners had back in the 70s, where, for example, especially in women's prisons, like Leslie Van Houten, like in CIW, California Institution for Women, and CIW is not only a lot more lax, but you see people like Leslie wearing street clothes. And it wasn't until basically the 90s where a lot of prisons, I think, just as a whole decided no more street clothes, everyone wears the jumpsuit. But anyway, so back in the 70s, Leslie and Frank Earl Andrews conjured up a relationship. They would send letters to each other, and, you know, he would visit her. They would like kiss on each other and stuff like that. And in news articles, he stated that he had planned to marry her. And he had plans to also release a book of the letters that they sent to each other. Now, I could not find that. I guess it never came to fruition and never came to be. Obviously, Leslie never married Frank Earl Andrews, and at some point, one way or another, the relationship between them dissipated. I don't know why exactly. I'm not trying to imply anything with that. I'm just saying I don't know what happened to the relationship. You can't find anything about that. Whatever book he was going to make about her never came to be. But going to pros and cons, this book came out in 1976, and Frank Earl Andrews, put Leslie at the very back of the book. He literally wrote that he had, to save the best for last. Now, Carlene Faith also mentions in her book, The Long Prison Journey, that Leslie was published in the magazine New Dawn in, I think, also 1976. And I ended up actually finding a copy of this magazine on Amazon. And thankfully, the person, sent it to me very quickly, and is in very, very good condition. All the pages intact, including the short story from Leslie Van Houten. Now, I will admit I was a bit disappointed when I got this magazine, because I ordered the book first, Pros and Cons. I bought this book first, and then I bought the magazine second. And I was hoping that whatever was published in the magazine would be different, because on the cover of the magazine, it didn't say what was published. And Carlene didn't say either in her book. So I was a little disappointed to find, it's the same exact story published in the magazine as it is in Frank Earl Andrews' book. But at the same time, too, I'm like, okay, well, at least we have 2 copies of this, right? What's also interesting is that in Frank Earl Andrews' book, there are just a few pieces of art from Leslie and Patricia Krenwinkel, though at the end of the book, it doesn't put the name over who drew what. And at the front of the book, it says, so-and-so made this, this, and this, but it said that it's on these pages, like 300 and da-da-da. I don't know why it says 300 and 305 when there's not even 300 pages in this book. So I'm not sure what the point was with that. But I will say that obviously this is a one-time printing. I don't believe this has ever been published ever again. And because it's the same story in the magazine and the book, I will be reading I'm a Fibbon from Frank Earl Andrews' book. So without further ado, from Pros and Cons. Leslie Van Houten, California Institution for Women. In accord with saving the best for last, we have followed suit here, and think you will find the writings of this sensitive little thoroughbred worthy of many raves. She, too, lived in the shadow of the gas chamber, but with a surprising resiliency, she refused to let it numb her, and set about turning the dreariness of life in prison to her advantage. Leslie is in tune with the planet, smelling extra deep of the fragrance in a rose, or dreaming dreams of the desert and the sea, or even finding flavor in the dryness of a cardboard-tasting institutional dinner. She never wrote a word for publication in her life, but fortunately, she did this time. So we are all rolling in good fortune because of it. I'm a Fibbon. Come with me, a uniformed officer directed. A steel gate rolled open, then shut behind us. My first impression was that I had entered Fort Knox, but no. It was the county jail, and judging by my escort's iceberg features, I knew I wasn't going to be treated like a gold bar. Well, I told myself, better prepare for the trip of your life, Goily. With that in mind, I took a deep breath and forced my chin up. What the hell? Worst could happen was I'd get back down. Being booked was frantic and confusing. Birthday, age, last address, name, sput, burp, burp. I'm a Fibbon, 85, Apollo 11. Wrist! An ID bracelet was clamped on my extended wrist. I was born again. 439126. A pointed finger directed me around a corner. Strip. I removed my clothing. Bend over and spread your legs. While my ovaries were inspected, I tried to escape the smothering reality of the situation by thinking of myself as citation, being prepared for the Kentucky Derby. It was impossible to drift away for long enough, and the venomous-sounding commands dragged me back. Follow me. Another room. Another officer. This woman looked like Night Train Lane's daddy. Get in the tub. Conscious of my nakedness, I lowered myself into 3 inches of water after banging my knee on the side of the tub. I splashed a bit, mostly going through the motions. I was much too nervous to miss my rubber ducky. 2 sets of unfeeling eyes watched as I stepped out. Night Train spun me around like a top, while Iceberg Face sprayed me all over with insecticide from a hose attached to the wall. Making a final attempt at dignity, I tried pretending that I was a string bean plant and that the farmers were trying to keep insects from eating my leaves. Your dress. Night Train handed me a folded bundle. The dress was constructed out of faded blue denim with a big L on the front. I figured it must be one of Night Train's seconds because it hung over me like a tent. It stuck in places, but that was probably because no one had seen fit to give me a towel, and I was soaking wet. The sweater they gave me was definitely a fugitive from a nursery school because it ended right at the elbows and just a few inches below the bust. Definitely no wash and wear. The rubber thongs that served as shoes were also minuscule, and I knew at first glance they would never be able to deal with my moon men. Hoping they would exchange them for a larger size, I inquired about the possibility. I should have checked with Jimmy the Greek first. Then I'd have known the odds were 1,000,000,000 against such a consideration. Wear that. We aren't running Macy's. Iceberg Face pointed a gnarled finger at a seat in front of a glaring light and a whole lot of photographic equipment. I sat down, grinning like a Cheshire cat. Don't smile. This isn't for the cover of Cosmopolitan. No wonder all the post office mugshots looked so rough. Nobody said cheese or even held up a little birdie. Fingerprints followed the mug shots, and by the time we were finished, my nails had been beaten down to stubbles. To top it off, my cigarettes were all gone. I was near tears because I knew that place wasn't going to be my friend. Birthday, age, last address, name, sput, burp, burp, burp. I'm a Fibbon, 85, Apollo 11. Follow me, I'm a Fibbon. Night Train tucked the football under her arm and headed upfield. She stopped at an elevator. Then we joined a group of other fish. The next stop was the infirmary, and a nurse with more questions than Carter had little liver pills. Pneumonia, Parkinson's disease, leprosy, peanut butter bolakis, birthday, age, last address, name. I'm a Fibbon, 85, Apollo 11. Can I have an aspirin? I'm starting to feel like a hypochondriac. You'll feel a lot worse in the hole if you don't button your trap, said Florence Nightingale sweetly, before disappearing in a swish of white. The next stop on the itinerary was the tank. We marched in twos, and I was just getting into the old esprit de corps when we reached our destination. The hike was over. We was home at last. The tank was made up of 12 cells, enclosed in a barred compound, sort of a dozen little cells surrounded by one big one. The front of each cell was in fact a sliding door, which was constructed out of bars. The only outside light flowed in through a row of windows adjacent to a catwalk that ran the length of the tier. Behind the row of residences ran the electrical and sewage lines, the latter being obvious via the funky odors that filtered through a small vent in the rear of the cell. The tank officer opened the tier gate, and as each fish passed through, Night Train handed her a granny sleeping gown, a sheet, and a mattress cover, all made out of muslin. I'm a Fibbon. Yes. Cell 12. 12 was the last in line during my brief stroll to my new adobe hacienda. I set my mind out on one of its excursions, the kind that never let me fully escape for long, but which did provide a respite now and then. This time I opted for Alibaba, but before I could say, "Open sesame," the door thundered wide. The cell could have easily passed for a cave, but I didn't see any treasure lying around. My mind came back at that point, and it dawned on me that I would be spending the night in a cage with two complete strangers. I made a quick assessment of the cell. There were only 2 bunks, and since they were occupied with 2 beings who were occupied with the jail's most popular pastime, zing, I assumed the mat on the floor belonged to little old me. When I dragged the pallet out from under the bottom bunk, one of my roomies muttered something which sure didn't sound like a greeting. A few minutes later, as I spread my linen over the mattress, I found that my original thought had been correct. Come on with all that goddamn noise, girl. Jesus Christ! Trying to get some fucking sleep. I sat down on my unmade mattress, but remained awake, trying to figure out some solution to the 1,000,001 questions that floated in and out of my mind. They were still floating when the harshly lit county jail greeted the dusky dawn. I decided to announce that I had never been in the slammer before, and that I hoped my cellmates would overlook any breaches of etiquette I might commit. I received a few grunts and sidelong glances for my efforts, making me more aware only of the fact that I was just a dumb, scared, dizzy hippie who would be better off keeping her mouth shut. I climbed off my regal sack, slid it under the bottom cot, and sat on the floor by the door, waiting for whatever came next. I didn't have long to wait and damn near had a miscarriage when the 12 doors opened in unison, almost catching the hem of my denim tent in the process. I thought, surely that rumble would measure at least 6 points on the Richter scale. 1 step out and halt. The command came from a new officer, or at least a different one from the guard who had tucked us in. She wasn't a bad-looking woman, except for an exaggerated bra that made her mammary stick out like 2 torpedoes, and a young face that was tight. Her words were clipped. She waited for us to line up in front of our cells before starting her orientation. There is to be no talking in the dining area. Anyone caught with her mouth open, except for eating, will lose her meal and end up in lockup. Upon returning from the dining area, you will go immediately to your cells and stand facing them. Do not talk, or your doors will not be opened, and you will remain standing at attention until I feel the inclination to let you in. Is that perfectly clear? The last was ridiculous. How could it be otherwise? The mode of travel going to and from the mess hall was in pairs. By now, everyone knew who they would double up with, except me. Pairing was usually white on white, black on black, with an occasional sprinkling of salt and pepper. While I stood there, like a new kid on the block, the others fell into line. I was getting a bit apprehensive when a tall woman with a short afro motioned for me to stand next to her. She was the tank trustee, and I smiled my gratitude, not giving a damn that her skin was the color of deep chocolate. She smiled back, and I felt a lot better. The advantage of pairing with the trustee meant marching at the front of the line. As we started off, I turned myself into a wagon train scout. Searching from side to side, I made certain no bandits were lurking in the underbrush, crouching in ambush on our wagon train. My vigilance got us through the pass and into the mess hall safely. Here, masses of women and blue herded masses of prisoners in and out, amid the sounds of bashing metal trays, clanking spoons, and shouting guards. Keep that line moving. Shut your trap. Eyes to the front. Yip, yip, yip. Move along, little doggy. Kee, yippee. The mess hall could hold about 150 women, but using the shuttle method with people constantly rotating in and out, a population of about 600 female souls ate in the space of an hour. The line filed along one wall, passing first a tray rack, then a kitchen worker who handed out spoons. Across an aluminum counter, food was wrapped onto the trays by a varying shade of inmate arms, belonging to blank and empty faces. Diners then moved between rows of 4 set dinette tables, sat down and started scoffing mucho fasto. Eating time ranged between 10 and 15 minutes, making it apparent that Amy Vanderbilt's book of etiquette wasn't written with prisoners in mind. If one was to be full, speed was the order of the day. Perpetual motion by both spoon and lips. Otherwise, a resident could find herself marching out with tears in her eyes and a protesting stomach. I had always wondered if the James Cagney, George Raft prison movies were mostly put-ons, but I soon learned that there was much authenticity in the shifting of eyes without turning the head. To a basketball player, this is known as lateral vision. But when mentioned in association with people behind bars, it is called sleazy-eyed. Yet, by making little slits out of my eyes, I found that I could peek around at will without being detected, thus get a glimpse of what was going on. Hundreds of eyes peering like mine, hundreds of prisoners talking, but not one pair of lips moving. I especially noted the numerous affirmative nods and hand signals to my partner, and I felt good about that, more secure, sort of in like Flynn. "You dumb honky bitch!" A loud voice erupted suddenly. "Don't you never put your nasty white paws in my cup! How the hell do I know where your hand's been at?" The activity turned instantly into silence. I held my breath. A riot, and they didn't even know my mama's phone number. But my fears were groundless, because without a word of admonishment, an officer brought the culprit another cup. Soon, spoons were clinking away again, as if nothing had ever happened. 2 beeps and a bop later, we were on the way out of the mess hall, moving first in single file so that an officer at the door could make sure each woman turned in a spoon. Then in pairs again for the march back to the tier. Hut, 2, 3, 4, hut, 2, 3, 4, hut, 2, 3, 4. Ain't no use in looking down. Hut, 2, 3, 4. Ain't no discharge on the ground. Hut, 2, 3, 4. The tier gate banged shut behind us, and we waited in front of our cells. Everyone was eager for a return to the slammers. Bullet Breast had other ideas. "Now really, ladies," she scolded like a schoolmarm. The line returning from the dining room area was a shambles. I warned you earlier that if you persisted in acting like juveniles, then you could expect to be treated like same. Let's see if you are mature enough to remain quiet for the next 20 minutes. The keys jangled away, and ironically on cue, the squawk box over our heads began emitting music. After a few bars of Just a Little Lovin' early in the morning, frayed nerves gave way first with a hissed, "That bitch," then a disgusted, "What a motherfucker," finally topped off with a weary, "Shit, I'm tired." The versatile vocabulations, all referring to BB, were phenomenal in that during a 20-minute period she was called every low name in the English language without one repetition. There was even a puta thrown in there for good measure. Then the ring of returning keys cut all of that off. Like 10 soldiers, we tightened ranks, and then Generalissimo BB rounded the bend. She beamed with satisfaction. "All right, ladies. Maybe next time you'll do better." She was about to swing the doors when the third woman on my left decided to let loose with a few things that had been overlooked. Trouble with you, bitch, is you ain't grinning and walking bow-legged. Just because your dude's a fag don't mean you supposed to bring your attitude in here on us. Naturally, Penelope DeBust responded to the outburst. Perhaps the lady with the foul mouth will be honest enough to repeat that to my face. From further down the line, ain't no Abe Lincoln's here, woman. After the titter died away, BB locked the control box and delivered another slap on the wrist, probably designed to alienate us from the girls who had done the talking. Stay there, then, until I find out who the guilty parties are. She jangled away, and the Legionnaire slumped. I was definitely tired, but I felt good behind the fact that no one had given up our loud-mouthed comrades, even though we all wanted to strangle them. An hour later, the doors numbled open. I waited until my roomies had tumbled back into their sacks, then brushed the violin-sized footprints off my mattress. Before I could flop, a guard appeared on the outside catwalk. I'm a Fibbon, ora pua, elka onea, opta unkba. Good thing I understood pig Latin, because that sure was the way the instructions were spewed out. However, the news was pleasing, since 3 people in that can was kind of tight. A show-enough case against putting them little fishies in a can. The thought of my own bed made me lightheaded, on equal terms with a kid who just received an all-day sucker from the dentist in return for not biting his finger. In one quick motion, I swooped up my bedding and belongings and backed out the door, which had been deadlocked open. I felt a momentary pang of gratitude for my roomies, since neither one of them had stepped on my head during the night, so I hesitated long enough to say, adios, amigos. I should have known better. Goodbye, motherfucker, one of them growled, as glad to be rid of me as I was glad to be gotten rid of. On feet with wings, I floated down the freeway, tempted to do a few pirouettes. Because of the precarious grip on my bundle, I gave the dance a second thought, and instead hummed along with the radio. You got me going in circles. At the same time, I counted down the cells under my breath. 7, 6, 5, 4, blump. Watch where the fuck you're going. Actually, the contact was another driver's fault, as I was on the freeway, and she had darted from the 3rd cell, like coming out of a side street without first checking traffic on the turnpike. Yet, she was built like Sonny Liston, and since I hadn't received any black belts in karate, I figured diplomacy was the wisest course. I excused myself in a little girl voice and made a wide swing around her. Without further mishap, I finally managed to set myself down on landing pad 1. Residence Uno was exactly like Crib Deuce, Hacienda Tre, or Penthouse Foru. Bunks like springs, a small shelf at the foot of each bed, a sink with a metal mirror over it, and a commode. In front of the throne stood a tall tin locker, which afforded some toilet privacy if the door was open. There was also a small desk, which served better as a seat. The bottom bunk was made up, so I went about making the top bunk, obsessed with the idea of getting some sleep. Once I climbed in, Rip Van Winkle's sleeping record was in serious jeopardy of being put to shame. The first problem I encountered was with the mattress cover, which fit my past palate perfectly, but had obviously shrunk up overnight, or else my new mattress needed some lessons in weight watching. After huffing and puffing, stomping on the corners, holding in check a compulsive and overwhelming urge to bite the mother, the mattress was finally encased. When I climbed to the floor again to view my Herculean accomplishment, all four corners curled up at me in contempt, not to mention the appearance of so many lumps that my gondola looked like a young mountain range. I climbed back on board, spread-eagled, flapping with both arms and kicked with both heels. The minute I let up pummeling, the darn thing curled right back up. After a few more fruitless bashes, I gave up, forcing myself to look at it optimistically. Hell, if the floods came again, I was equipped with a ready-made boat. Besides that, I doubted if any stray sharks would attack that monstrous-looking thing. Whoever heard of a shark leaping at a gondola with a mountain range in the middle anyway? Both the towel rack and the locker were filled, so all I could do was stack my belongings on the top shelf. The minute I had everything lined up nice and neat, I tumbled into the gondola, almost too pooped to pop. A raucous voice froze my 2-second nap. "Get those things off that shelf!" She had to be kidding. "You there in the first cell!" She wasn't. I crawled to my knees and looked at her through the bars. It was BB, and her jibs were so tight I thought for sure that any minute she'd fire those 90mm howitzers at me. "There's nothing to be on that shelf except a tin cup and an ashtray. Do you understand?" "Well, where do I—" "Are you refusing to obey an order?" I was still having difficulty adapting to the blind obedience bit, and that continual "do you understand" thing was getting harder and harder to put up with. For a moment I envisioned myself down on my haunches, scratching myself under both arms and jumping up and down like Cheetah in the Tarzan movies. But common sense prevailed and I backed off. "I understand," I said weakly. "That's better," she snapped, unable to resist jamming the rest of her authoritarian crap down my throat. She drove away, and I took my things down off the shelf, wondering where the hell I was supposed to put them. I could make a pack and strap it to my back. Nah. Maybe I could stuff everything inside my gondola. What with all the lumps, it wouldn't even be noticed. I was still pondering the problem when intuition told me there was someone behind me. There was. The trustee leaning against the open door. I dangled my legs over the side of the bunk. Our eyes locked and I felt myself being raped. I jumped to the floor and stuck my hands self-consciously into my pockets, checking to make sure her gaze hadn't seared my dress. She drew deep on a cigarette and smirked at my nervousness. "Hi, my name is Ima. What's yours?" "Norma," she said without emotion. She exhaled slowly and sat on the bottom bunk. Please, help me." A disheveled alcoholic stuck her head through the door, obviously in the throes of the DTs. She was ruined, and she couldn't have looked worse had a tractor trailer hit her and stopped and backed up for a few seconds just to make sure. My stomach gurgled with repugnance, and I had to turn away before it erupted. Norma wasn't fazed in the least. "Why don't you go find yourself a dime?" she said in the same dull voice. "Now call somebody who gives a damn. We all got problems, lady." The wretched woman sagged, hung onto the bars a minute, then somehow found a direction and wobbled away. I was confused at Norma's rudeness and apathy, yet doubted if I would have assisted the woman either. Not so much for a lack of compassion, but because she was so filthy and sick that I couldn't bear the thought of looking at her, let alone touching her. Norma simply wasn't affected in any way. "Well, where can I put my towel?" "Move mine over and put it next to that. You can use half the locker for your other things." I began putting them in the locker, giving each item an extra loving pat, like a kindly mother who had found some orphans a home and wanted to show them that everything was all right now. "You ain't planning on getting bailed, are you?" I almost fainted. Some interest. At last. I restrained the impulse to go into my old high school sis boom ba bag. I was eager for some conversation, but at the same time aware of the ways people in jail acted, which was not to display anything. I finished stacking my belongings before I replied. "I don't know what bail is. I haven't been to court yet." "Nurse's line! Nurse's line!" The brittle announcement shook the walls, but it turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because whoever made the announcement forgot to put the music back on. "If I had a peep at your passport," Norma said, "you got yourself one heavy problem, honey." I scuffled my feet around. "Yeah, I know. See, it wasn't—" "Hold it," Norma cut in. "I don't give a shit what you did or didn't do. But if you care about yourself, keep your mouth shut about it. Else you might find yourself getting buried alive while some other bitch rolls free at your expense. These walls got ears. You'll be okay if you keep that in mind." "All late courts line up with your wristband showing." Norma made a face at the loudspeaker. "Shut the fuck up." She turned her attention back to me. "Don't look like you got much going for yourself at the moment." She took a pack of smoke from the locker. Before she could give me the entire pack, I indicated just one cigarette. She laughed, that knowing look of hers, busted the pack, and gave me one. She x-rayed me again with her eyes and tossed the pack on the bed. "Later. I'll get you whatever else you need." I couldn't make too much sense out of Norma. One second she came off as a cold, unfeeling individual, and the next she was beautiful. I liked mucho the second half of her. She handed me a book of matches, and I lit up my Pall Mall. It was my first cigarette in some time, and the smoke almost choked me. "Thanks," I coughed, handing her the matches back. "Ladies, canteen will be here in half an hour. Have your ditty bags ready." Norma flipped her butt into the john. "Got any bread?" I shook my head. "Norma, what are you in here for?" "Couple robberies and parole violation." "Parole?" My eyes widened. "You've been in prison?" "Fact is, honey, I've been in here more than I've been out." Her face took on a faraway quality, and I could tell she was reflecting back. For a moment her face softened, but she caught herself quickly and put the barriers back up. Looky here, Ima. I plan to catch some Z's. So you make sure nobody comes in here bothering me. If you want something to occupy your mind, there's a mystery novel in the locker. She patted her pillow, while I drooled at how soft it looked. Damn, did I want some sleep. Norma kicked off her shoes and slid sideways onto her bunk, facing the near wall. I got a small dress coming in from the other side, she mumbled over her shoulder. When the trustee runs it this way, get it. Oh, she added, already half crashed out. That dress is worth 4 days in the hole, so be cool. And take your cigarettes off my bed. Norma gave orders in such a confident manner that it never occurred to me to protest. So, wearier than Rip Van Winkle, I found myself face down on my bunk, staring out through the bars, wondering what I was supposed to guard against. Oh well, if a whale swam up, I would just shout, "There she blows!" I giggled at the thought of curling Norma's snuggies with a play like that, but I also kept in mind how she looked when she was angry. So I thought better of the idea. I gave the mystery a few passes before realizing that I had already read it. Besides that, my sunken eyeballs were in no shape for a rerun at a tired book. A short time later, the trustee came along the outside corridor, whispering Norma's name. I jumped to the floor and went for the dress, which was bundled under her arm. Halfway across the tier, I heard my name barked out and almost fainted. Ima! Eek! Talk about crime prevention. I was caught before I had a chance to do anything wrong. I'm a Fibbon! I turned, trying to conceal my fear with a giant cheese. Take off your underwear and bra and get ready for Blood and V. Hurry! I don't have all day. When I looked back around, again the trustee had disappeared. But I was too confused to be relieved. What's Blood and V? I asked another woman walking towards the door. Oh man, they take some blood and check your moneymaker for disease. I was perplexed about missing the dress pickup, but more upset at the thought of the forthcoming examination. All Blood and V up front. A few seconds later, 20 of us were crammed into an elevator and speeding toward the top floor. We bounced to a stop. Everybody out. All right, ladies, no talking. Show your wristbands. Stand, single file. The tight-lipped officer stood stark against the infirmary's sparkling white walls. Lines of women slowly moved, like giant snakes, through one door to the next. Everyone appeared mangled and disheveled, yet each managed to maintain enough dignity to avoid the eyes of the other, acutely aware of the upcoming humiliation. 439126. I checked my wristband. That was me. In here. I stepped into the room, where a doctor immediately closed curtains all around us. Lay on the table. Put your feet in the stirrups. The thought of what he meant to do caused me to momentarily despise myself for being a woman. I followed his instructions, bracing myself for the alien inspection of my most intimate parts. I wasn't prepared for the excruciating pain that came next. God, it hurt. I held my breath while he crudely extracted his utensil, and if it wasn't for the cry I had choked off in my throat, I would have told him that my tonsils could be reached much easier from up top. Okay, put your legs together and get up. He flung the curtain back, and as I went out, I eyed the next victim with pity. Little did she know that Dr. Jekyll was waiting to turn a painless inspection into a painful one. I felt myself being whirled in a circle. The old pinned the tail on the mule, with my arm turning into the ass. Blood was extracted from me so fast that I didn't have a chance to yell, ouch. This way. Another spin the bottle. I turned myself into a helicopter. After a brief flight around the room, I landed in front of an X-ray machine. Deep breath. Hold it. Boosh. Clump. Thank you. Next. All ladies who are finished, on the elevator. No talking. Who wanted to talk? Who could? The esprit du corps had been drained out of us, and ragtagged legionnaires shuffled toward the elevator. 7th Cavalry returning from Little Bighorn after Sitting Bull was finished with them. As we neared my tier, I could think of nothing but nod. I foolishly contemplated the idea of getting off some nod. Norma and I went to church on Sunday. We had 2 purposes for attending. It offered a chance for fresh air, as the chapel was located outside, and we wanted to see our friend Sparky. We weren't interested in threats of God's wrath, which was always in the weekly sermon. And on this occasion I almost interrupted the speaker to ask if he had a hotline from above. He sure sounded like he was in direct contact. 5 minutes after the service started, one woman began feeling the spirit and started shouting, "Hallelujah! Praise the Lord!" Heads turned toward the back, where an elderly woman with skinny arms and wearing a shrunk-up sweater had stood up and was waving her arms in the air. "Thank you, Jesus!" She ranted with tears in her eyes. Several police who had been patrolling the aisle closed in on the woman. She was grabbed under the armpits and escorted out. Amen. The pianist struck a few chords, and we stood in unison to the speaker's all-encompassing hand sweeps. Then listened to the opening refrain of the old rugged cross. Where are they taking her? I sang in tune with the music. To the old M.O. ward. Norma sang back. Where they keep all the nuts. Sparky caught up with us on the way out. Her blue eyes were red, and it was obvious she was under the influence of something besides the atmosphere. She asked if we wanted to get bombed out, speaking openly and without bothering to put any shade on herself. The idea of dope inside the jail made me nervous, and I shook my head. I didn't want any part of it. "Beatrice, what are you doing out of line?" The livid-lipped officer stood right next to us. "Let me see your wristbands." We did, and she jotted all 3 of our numbers. "You are not to return to church for 3 weeks." Hallelujah. Sure wasn't no big thing with me, because I had no plans on coming back in 3 years. The only thing I learned was Sparky's name, which made it understandable why she adopted the Sparky moniker. Beatrice. Yuck. We sure blew that, huh? I whispered to Norma. You mean church? Norma seemed quite unaffected by the whole affair, and more interested in getting into the cell. Hey, officer, open cell 1. The door grumbled open and we sauntered in. Once a month is more than enough religion for me. Norma scoffed. She slapped my back and laughed at her reflection in the mirror. You got that right. I lit a smoke. How long have you guys been doing this? Oh, about as long is, Norma responded offhandedly. Line up in twos and proceed to the dining area. The box barked before I had a chance to answer. We leaped out because whoever was swinging the doors must have thought she had a bunch of Flash Gordons under her command. And the second the sliding gates banged open, they were grinding closed again. The tier was full of unruly women, dancing and giggling at each other. It was evident that half the tank was zoinked out. The procession to the mess hall was a straggly one, and when Norma had trouble making it up a ramp, I knew she was high as a buzzard in heat. I guess she had gotten something from Sparky, even though I hadn't seen the action. But flying, my roommate was, and without wings. When we got to the mess hall, we found a woman lying in the doorway, face down. I stopped. Step around. Keep the line moving. I said step around. Like zombies marching through limbo. We all silently obeyed. The woman just lay there on the floor while someone went to get a wheelchair. From what I'd heard about the infirmary, she was probably better off right where she was. Normally, just sitting on the little mess hall stools was a risky proposition. But that day, most of the women found it near impossible. A resident next to me plopped off hard, then wobbled up, cursing like a mule skinner. Another woman collapsed in the meal line, and telephones started buzzing. When still another woman went down for the count, and a little red pill rolled out of her pocket, the stuff was on. An officer nearby picked up the pill, gasped, and ran to a wall alarm. Beepers beeped, bells banged, horns honked, and it sounded like one of those SAC red alerts. Brass stormed quickly into the mess hall, like a swarm of bees hot on the case of a honey-looting bear. Sergeants, lieutenants, captains, and a couple of generalissimos for good measure. I watched in awe. Lines were pulled out of the mess hall. It was well before the allotted 15 minutes, and we were pushed into the TV room instead of our tank. How come they put us here? I asked Norma. She was hot. What the fuck do you think we're here for? They're searching for the Reds. I started to say something else, but she cut me off. I don't want to hear it. A short time later, the uniformed search party moved into our tank. We watched intently through a window in the door as the searchers went on a binge, reminiscent of a bunch of old biddies let loose at a bargain basement sale. Things were thrown every which way. Boxes were turned over. Linen was tossed onto the floor. Ashtrays were dumped indiscriminately. Everything not bolted down received the business, and not even the pictures on the walls were spared. For a while it appeared as if our tank was going to get away clean. It was my thought that maybe everything had been consumed. At about that point, a sergeant struck gold. She came out onto the freeway, carrying a pillowcase. She set it down and began pulling pills from it by the fistful. Her expression was one of crazed joy. This discovery would garner her plenty of extra points and could even lead to a promotion. Our cell reflected a disaster area, and as we stood open-mouthed, wondering where to start cleaning up, BB decided to take a patrol along the catwalk. "Ladies, your cells are a mess," she piped. "Double scrub. There'll be an inspection shortly." 3 weeks later, I received my first visit. It was Julie, a friend from the old neighborhood. Her bright, colorful clothing and neatly curled hair appeared foreign to me. There was a mixture of excitement and fear on her sheltered face. She had trouble starting the conversation, so I began firing questions on the telephone about the friends we knew and the places where we used to hang out. This eased the tension somewhat, and soon we were gossiping like a pair of freshly unmuzzled magpies. Our 20 minutes ended in 5 seconds, much too fast, and in the middle of thanking Julie for the $2 she had given me, the receiver was cut off. I waved goodbye to Julie and carefully formed the words, "Come again." She blew me a kiss and nodded. After that, she showed every week. Norma was pleased to see that I had some money. New bookings came into the tank regularly, and since they never brought cigarettes or candy, those with money were more than willing to pay extra for items. By stocking heavy, Norma and I could increase our income rather handsomely by selling the victuals for double the price. Of course, since there was a limit as to how many cigarettes and candy bars each resident could purchase at one time, we preferred payment in supplies rather than cash. This way, we managed to constantly stock up, but without spending any of our own money. Naturally, such a practice was frowned upon by the authorities, but what the shucks, some of those people frowned on breathing. "Just don't feel sorry for anyone," Norma schooled. "Most of these folks will split before you do anyway. If they complain about the price, don't worry about it, because there's always another train on the same track. Besides, we got the only store on the tier, so it's either us or wait. You dig? Another game you gotta watch for is somebody saying you ought to give 'em a break, because they're my friend. Don't go for that, as my tights all know that this is my hustle, you know what I mean, Jelly Bean?" I enjoyed the excitement of becoming Norma's business partner. "I understand, Rubber Band." Our store turned out to be a huge success, and it brought enough profit to easily support one of my newly acquired pleasures, gambling. I found it to be a relaxing pastime. The Yuletide approached. This was always a depressing period for women in jail, as thoughts turned to families, children, and friends. There would be no chestnuts roasting on any open fires, nor would St. Nick be wise if he fooled around in the bleak confines of CJ, unless he wanted to find himself posing for a mug shot. At Christmas breakfast, I looked for Sparky, but she wasn't in the mess hall. Dee Dee caught my questioning look and signaled that she was in the hole. I spent the rest of the meal thinking about Sparky. Finally, I decided that I would join her in lockup. "Damn her," I said to Norma, back on the tier. "Why on Christmas?" "What you gonna do about it?" Norma baited. "Go down there and wish her a Merry Christmas," I retorted. Norma popped her fingers gleefully and went through some Flip Wilson motions. I strolled to the front of the tier and asked BB if she would kindly sharpen my pencil. "You'll have to wait. I'm busy." That was the usual answer, and the one I'd been waiting for. It gave me an excuse to start spouting out foul language, and I told her in layman's terms what I thought of her and her jail. She wasn't too busy after that little barrage, and before I could say plickety-plunk, I found myself in the empty TV room. A few minutes later, The sergeant who'd busted open the red connection showed up. We had encountered each other on previous occasions, although those were relatively mild meetings, so we weren't strangers. Ima, what is this? The sergeant's tone was brittle. I waved my arms in disgust. I'm tired. I've had it. I just don't care anymore. Ima, now you just simmer down. I almost fainted. Where was Sergeant Regulations coming from? Actually trying to soothe me. Just because I love pizza doesn't mean I have to act as a Roman. I refuse. I fixed her with my Henrietta VIII glare, thinking, eat your heart out, Richard Burton, 'cause I'm a Fibbon is a natural. The sergeant continued trying to reason with me. It's Christmas, and I don't want to bring you punishment on this holy day. In fact, I'm going to overlook your actions in the hope that you will repay my kindness by behaving yourself in the future. I didn't really want a vendetta with the sergeant, so I backed up. Okay, I muttered, and slouched all the way back to my tank. Baby let me in, seemingly unaffected, except that her jaws were so tight, her cheeks were twitching. I entered our cell like a whooped dog, with his tail tucked between his legs. Just my luck. On the day I was loaded for bear, everyone else was practicing humanity. Norma was still in the bed, but propped on her elbow, smoking. What happened, baby? She looked confused, since the whole tier had heard firsthand the sharpened pencil affair. And that was supposed to be some show-enough, long-gone lockup. Oh, man, I mumbled. Everybody's full of goodwill, favors, all that shit. Before I messed, I got another brainstorm. Norma giggled at what I planned to do, but expressed some doubts about whether or not I would follow through. I lit my cigarette and sat on the table, feeling it as my adrenaline began to push in anticipation of the upcoming I'm a Fibbon Christmas special. We entered the mess hall in the usual manner. Norma was behind me, but quiet, just observing. Wide-eyed, I looked around, completely discarding the Cagney shade. Eyes straight ahead. I took a deep breath, then shouted at the top of my lungs. Merry Christmas! Everything stopped dead. But I noticed that most of the long faces had changed into grins. Thus encouraged, I began hollering to everyone I knew, then to some peeps I didn't know. Each of them responded with a Merry Christmas and a smile. Finally, the Yuletide spirit was strangled by prison discipline, in the form of 2 officers who pulled me out of line. Ima, come with us. We went through hallways, down ramps, always down. The deeper we got, the quieter it became. Eventually, we reached a level where there was no music. Instead, the tank echoed with a variety of sounds. Hey, officer, you don't give me a cigarette, God is going to send you to hell. Another voice spewed out every swear word in existence. When she ran out of those, she invented some of her own. Her vocal cords were at full strength. Shut those goddamn nuts up! This came from the other side of the tank. I was escorted to that side. So, this is the lockup? I was hoping someone would say, yep, now you know, so you can go back upstairs. Instead, I was frisked bare. The tier gate opened. Cell 10! The freezing faces hadn't melted 1 degree. I walked by the cells, afraid to look in on the inhabitants. Hey, Ima! It was Rio. I stopped. Rio? What are you still doing down here? She had disappeared the day after the Reds bust. Move on, Ima. I took another look at Norma's disheveled partner and scurried away. Is that you, Ima? A familiar voice queried, shouting over the other noises. The atmosphere was eerie and tense, but I tried to make light of my fear. Yes, me. Is that you? Sparky laughed. I figured she was about 5 cells away, toward the back, and I fought against the urge to run past cell 10 to see her. You know it is, girl. How come you're here? I couldn't imagine why Sparky sounded in such good spirits. I was ready to go back upstairs. Figured I'd come down and wish y'all a Merry Christmas. My voice was beginning to crack. Hey, Rio, did you hear? Yeah, Rio bellowed. That's my baby, Sparky concluded with a little squeal. I looked over my shoulder, still tempted to run and see Sparky, but the male officer was starting down the tier menacingly. I said, get into your cell. Get into cell 10. Now! I ran inside, and after the door slammed behind me, I stood in the center of the cell until my eyes adjusted to the gloom. There were cornflakes glued to the wall. Most of the springs were missing from the bed, and there was no locker. Lipstick writings were everywhere. Floor, ceiling, walls, and the most interesting notice referred to a former king of rock and roll. Elvis Presley is my wife. He is... Huh? Well, I'd like to inform you, your old lady is dead. He died from a heart attack after a hound dog shit on his blue suede shoes. Someone started rattling a door, making the whole tank vibrate. A loud, deep voice blurted, "Get off the motherfucking door!" There was a sudden quiet, but a short-lived one, broken first by a racial slur, then an outburst of opposing viewpoints. We dined alone on paper plates, with paper spoons, and coffee in paper cups. All the food was cold, and I just sat and watched the instant potato sag away. Part of the lockup punishment was no sugar, salt, cream, or canteen, which made it quite clear that the lockup section was the real jail, with all the 20th century refinements rubbed away. A trustee came by to collect the dirty plates. As I handed her mine, she slipped me 2 cigarettes and some help underneath the plate. I caught them in my hand. The woman winked, and I winked back. Sparky was doing okay in the dungeon. I split the match and lit one of my cigarettes, constantly waving it around so the smoke wouldn't bill out the door in a cloud. I only took a few drags, then clenched, once again for the purpose of keeping the smoke and odor at a minimum. I hid the remaining paraphernalia under a roll of toilet paper. A split match, a piece of striker, and a butt and a half. A few minutes later, I received my linen and immediately made up my bed. It looked so comfortable, and I was contemplating a quick nap, but the bar rattler started up again and had a real freaky time of making everybody miserable. I flopped down anyway, and to my surprise, found that the incessant rhythm of the shaking door was actually soothing me to sleep. When I returned from the land of Nod, the lights were on in the outside corridor. Time had disappeared completely, and I wasn't sure if it was still the same day or the next morning. Tears filled my eyes as I reflected on how low I had come in existence. Not only was I in jail, but I was in a jail that was in the jail. I consoled myself with the fact that at least I would be released from lockup in the foreseeable future, whereas those women on the other side would live in this hellhole indefinitely. The thought made me bitter. The idea that there wasn't enough compassion involved with handling the women who couldn't help her actions. I thought about the old lady in church and wondered about her fate. "Lights out, ladies." The officer placed a special emphasis on ladies, indicating she felt the title was really out of place. "There will be no more talking." Even the wackos on the other side quieted down. I was thinking about Norma when Rio's voice started to float down the tier. She was singing Amazing Grace, and as I lay on my cot, an extraordinary sense of peace overtook me. I thought it was ludicrous that such beauty and sweetness could thrive in that sickening environment. Perhaps the filth and degradation played a part in making Rio's gentle sound so lovely. When the song ended, someone sniffled. It took a moment or two for me to realize that I was the sniffler. "Night, baby," Sparky said through the quiet. "Night, Sparky," I said, crawling under the covers. "Night, Rio." "Betty bye, Ima." The noise started up again on the other side, which served as a signal for the bar rattler on our side to start up. I slept through it all. I spent several days in the madness. On the 5th day, Sparky and I were notified that we would be getting out. I was relieved, because holding on to reality had become quite a chore. Rio was informed at the same time that she would remain in the hole. The woman who had gotten busted with the Reds had also implicated her. When I walked past her cell, I felt a heavy weight. I was thankful that I was going back upstairs, but I found it difficult to leave Rio behind. I stopped. "Well, man," I attempted a grin. "Keep on keeping on." Rio smiled through the bars. "Aw, shit." She popped her fingers. "Ain't nothing but a meatball." I touched Rio's hand, then walked toward the door. My pre-trial hearing went painfully slow. Before my trial began, Sparky was long gone to the joint, and Norma was scheduled to follow on her parole violation. We never discussed her leaving, except for the first time, where we both ended up boo-hooing like two babies. After that, we acted as if her leaving was of no great importance to either of us. I knew I would miss her terribly. However, I learned from Sparky's departure that I would recover. Losing friends was a normal part of pulling time. The bus from the women's prison always came on Thursday mornings. Norma and I had taken to bickering every Wednesday evening. On Thursdays, we wouldn't even look at each other until the shipment had gone. After a month of this ritual, her name finally appeared on the shipment list. "Well, baby, this is it." Her expression was cloudy. "You keep everything in the store and take care." I fought back the tears. "Why don't you take the cash? I'll keep the goodies. There's enough to maintain the business." She agreed, as real money was useful anywhere. I watched in silence while she packed a brown paper bag with necessities. Toothbrush, toothpaste, comb, cigarettes. I ached to tell her I would miss her, and that I would never forget her as long as I lived. But I knew the spoken words would make all of our defenses crumble. "You take care of yourself, you hear?" she mumbled, with her head bent over the bag. "Don't let me hear no kind of shit about you either." "You won't, Norma?" I almost choked on my uneven words. Finally, I decided that people shouldn't have to hide the things they felt. "I wish I was going with you," I blurted. She looked straight at me, first with the Norma look I had encountered on our first meeting. But it wouldn't work, and she knew it. "Stop talking crazy, Dismo." She smiled lovingly and ruffled my hair like my mama used to do. "We'll see each other again. You can be with that." "All ladies for the bus. Up front. Now!" "Well, that's my horse in the chute." She exhaled heavily. "My hair even?" She turned her back to me. I didn't reach for my usual pat. Instead, I had to wipe the blinding tears away with the back of my hand. Norma peered over her shoulder. She touched my face with her hand. "Bye, baby. You." Her demeanor began to fall apart, but before it did, she snatched up her bag and hurried out. She didn't look back. I took over as the new trustee, which meant I was the one who swept the tank and performed little odds and ends in return for a dress with 2 stripes and a pasta TV every night. The remainder of that day, when Norma left, I stayed in the cell with my face buried in the lousy mystery she had given me on my first day. Mainly, I thought about her and I cried. I woke up the next morning with the realization that it was time to get my head together. I was on my bunk smoking when a new bunch of bookings came onto the tier. One fish in particular caught my eye because it was obvious that she had never been in the slammer before. I saw the same frightened look I remembered carrying in with me. I stood up and leaned against my doorway as BB began assigning cells. When she came to the young girl, I motioned to have her put in my cell. The frightened juvenile from Juvenile Hall walked my way, and I scrutinized her closely. This in turn caused her to check herself out, mainly to see if she still had her dress on. I smirked. She jammed her hands into her pockets self-consciously. I pulled out a pack of cigarettes and offered her one. She took it, hesitating, then swallowed hard. "Hi, I'm Eloise Frigate." I stepped aside to let her pass. "I'm a Fibbon here. Come on in and make yourself at home. No sense standing on the freeway, acting like some kind of vagrant."